In today's video, we're going to cover what I call the art of the drug deal. Now, in all fairness, I have to explain to you guys what I mean by the art of the drug deal. When it comes to the end of a real estate transaction, everybody's nerves get on end because when we started out the transaction, everybody was all friendly, everybody was happy to get on their contract. Then, everything kind of went a little silent while the buyer finished their financing and got everything in order. The seller kind of started getting ready to move, but now we've reached 3, 4, 5 days before closing, and everybody knows, man, we're closing this week and we're going to get it done. Now everybody's emotions get on edge. The seller's worried, well, is the buyer really going to buy because I'm moving to a new property? The buyer's thinking to themselves, oh man, is my lender, are they going to have everything ready to go? Do we have everything ready for the move? The painter that I have coming in, is he scheduled to come in next week? I'm ready to go. Everybody's on edge and everybody's, crossing their T's and dotting their I's and trying to put everything together. So guess what? I once had a realtor, and I can't take credit for this. He told me, you know what? This time period, I have to imagine it's what a drug deal goes down. Because what ends up happening is you have a buyer that's like, give me the property, and you have a seller that's, give me the money, and everybody's trying to get everything ready, and everybody's trying to meet everybody's requirements to get it done, and you have a lot of tensions and you have a lot of emotions. So in today's video, I'm going to give you some tips on how I think you can ease that situation, how you can get yourself to closing, and how you can have a smooth transaction so everybody can take that happy closing picture in front of the house holding a big key that says just sold. Tip number 1, and this one I think goes for anything in life: maintain communication. Remember, maintain constant communication with everybody in the transaction. As I always tell you guys, there's a lot of parties in the transaction. There's a buyer, there's a seller, there's a buyer's family, the seller's family. You have the buyer's realtor, the seller's realtor. You have the mortgage broker, the title agent. Make sure that you are in constant communication with everyone. If someone says something to you and you don't understand what it is, reach out, ask them to explain it to you. Listen, if you are working with the right professionals, everybody understands that if you are the buyer or the seller in the transaction, you don't do this every day. There's a lot of moving parts. They will happily explain to you what's going on. But there's nothing worse in a transaction when people start to, get further on and we're closer to the end and there's this lack of communication, or people aren't talking, or they're not responding, or they're not being clear in what they need. If you're the buyer and you absolutely need to be in there by Friday, then you better start communicating with time and tell the seller, hey, no matter what, I need to be there on Friday. I have my movers. I have to be out of where I'm at. I promised, my current landlord that I'd be in there. If you're the seller and you have a similar situation, you need the buyer to absolutely close and we can't have any issues. Let everybody know what's going on. Let them know if you have issues. If you're the seller and you're in the property and you're having some issues, maybe you need to move a couple of things, let the buyer know with some time. Listen, as long as there's constant communication, everybody can work through the issues. I can tell you that 90% of the time when we have an issue towards the end, someone had not properly communicated what they thought they understood, what they needed, or what was truly going on, and everybody then gets all riled up and we need to then, resolve this fire drill. So maintain a constant line of communication and you'll set yourself up for a smooth closing. My second tip when you get towards the end of a real estate transaction is comply with all the requests that you receive timely and try not to get too annoyed. What you have to understand, especially if you're a buyer and you're using financing in a transaction, is your lender has been compiling your file throughout and has been preparing everything for underwriting. As it gets closer to the end of the transaction, they're going to submit it for what's known as the final clear to close. Well, when you get to that final clear to close, the lender is going to have somebody in what's known as their underwriting department, which just think of it as quality control. They're the last line of defense. They're going to review the file one last time. They might have a question or two for you for something that appears in that package that they provide to the underwriter. So keep that in mind, because when they ask you for these documents at the last minute, you might think to yourself, but wait a second, I told my lender like a month ago, this, and that. Well, what ends up happening is there's another person conducting quality control on the file, and they're going to ask you for certain things. By the same token, all the other parties in the transactions, they might start having last minute requests. Try to comply with them all as quickly as possible, because remember, in the last couple of days, everybody's gearing up. Everyone's trying to resolve everything in the transaction. So the quicker you respond to the request, the quicker people can move towards putting the whole file together, and the quicker we can get you to the closing table and moved into your new house. The third tip: conduct exercises for several months leading up to the closing with your writing hand. When you get to the closing table, you're going to sign a package of documents that's about 100 pages thick. All right. Now, a lot of people say, whoa, why is the bank making me sign all these documents? Remember, they're lending you money. They're lending you a sizable amount of money. They want to make sure that they are absolutely covered from every single issue that could come up. Remember, in 2007, 2008, what ended up happening? A lot of banks lost a lot of money. A lot of banks made a lot of loans that people decided not to pay. This time around, they want to make sure they cover themselves from every possible angle to make sure that their interest in the property is secured. So you're going to be signing a lot of documents. Also, when you get to the closing table, that package of documents, most of the time the lenders, since I just told you, the underwriter just looked at the file a day or two before, that package was created probably hours before it was delivered to a title agent such as myself. So that package of documents is going to have a bunch of documents in there, which everybody at the table is looking at for the first time. That doesn't mean we don't understand the documents, because we're used to pretty much seeing the documents time and time again, but it's going to be a long process. You're going to need about an hour, hour and a half to sign everything, and for us to be able to explain to you what each document is as we go through the package and explain to you what it is that the lender wants you to execute in order to finalize the loan. Tip number 4. Make sure you understand the closing timeline. What do I mean by the closing timeline? Particularly, I'm talking about the funding timeline. Now, you're going to sit at a conference table similar to ours for about an hour to an hour and a half, and you're going to sign all the documents that the lender gave you. Now, once you sign all those documents, everybody typically gets up and hugs, and we have this big, this big celebration, and some people even start popping bottles of champagne to celebrate. Well, at that point, technically, you're about 98% closed. What do I mean 98% closed? Well, once you execute all the documents, the lender's going to want to look through everything that was signed at the closing by yourself and by the seller to make sure that they can okay the funding of the transaction. So even though you signed all the documents agreeing to take on this loan, before they release the money to the title agent, they're going to say, send us everything so we can make sure everything was properly executed, and then we'll send the money to the title agent. Well, that process takes a couple of hours. As you can imagine, people sign. I can't tell you how many people sign at the closing table and they think they're going to be able to grab a moving truck and head straight to the house. It's going to take a couple of hours for the lender to turn around and tell us, you know what, you guys can fund the transaction. And then at that point, the title agent is going to receive that notification. They're going to do their final quality control as well, and then they're going to release the money to the seller. It's not until the seller gets their money in their account that they are going to allow you to go into the property. So keep that in mind, because if you're closing, you may not be moving into that property within the next hour. Granted, it'll be within 24 hours, most likely. But keep that in mind, because I can't tell you how many people show up in these outfits, ready to start painting, and looks like they're not going to be painting until the next day. So keep that in mind, and you'll have a smoother and more positive closing process. Tip number 5, celebrate. When you get to the end of the transaction, chances are you've been going at it for 45 days. If you're the buyer, you've been complying with all these requests from the lender. If you're the seller, you've been packing boxes. You've been trying to coordinate your new home or wherever it is you're moving. If you're moving into an apartment, whatever it may be, and you've gone through this process, just enjoy it. Realize that a lot of people don't go through this process. It's something enjoyable. At the end of the day, especially if you're buying it as your home, remember that it's going to be somewhere where you're going to live. And yes, a lot of people will tell you it's an investment and you can look at all of that. But remember, you spent a lot of time and effort. You've poured a lot of money into it. Celebrate and enjoy yourself. You made it to the end. Congratulations.